Massive news and updates coming in on Dan Ashworth to Manchester United. Newcastle very, very scared. Ineos making their approach. Their deal was approved by the Premier League today and the sporting director is next on the list. We've got the likes of Romano retweeting stuff, hinting at this being true. So let's get into all the news that's come out on Dan Ashworth to Manchester United tonight. There's a lot to get through. Going in with obviously the main report that was dropped by Luke Edwards of the Telegraph. Very good source of information saying that Newcastle fear that Dan Ashworth could leave. The question mark has always been, would Dan Ashworth leave Newcastle for United? We know that Man United have wanted Dan Ashworth, but realistically, I never thought that this guy would leave Newcastle for United when he was first linked. But if he was willing to leave Newcastle for Man United, that feels like the deal's going to happen. And there's reports saying that Newcastle now fearing he is going to leave. And Fabrizio Romano then reposted right after this news came out his context of saying that Man United and Ineos want Dan Ashworth to be the new face of the project. There's been a lot of quietness on the sporting director. Some reports coming out saying it's not going to be Dan Ashworth, but Romano kept saying, well, as far as he's aware, Dan Ashworth's the only one they're super interested in. So what were the reports that were coming out? What was the context? What was the information? There was a lot of rumours and reports the last few days, some from the not the best sources like Graham Bailey, just saying that United are ready to push ahead with their plans to bring in Newcastle sporting director Dan Ashworth. Fabrizio Romano again confirmed on the United stand just 2 days ago that Manchester United were really interested in Dan Ashworth, and that's the only name he knows that they were pursuing. But Luke Edwards of the Telegraph dropped this. He said that Newcastle United are concerned that speculation linking director of football Dan Ashworth with the new United has unsettled him at Tyneside. Senior figures at St James's Park are bracing themselves for a possible departure. Newcastle's hierarchy are well aware of the rumours and want to seek reassurances from Ashworth that he's committed to staying long term. This commitment has not yet explicitly been given publicly or privately, and things are likely to come to a head in a few days. So basically, just for a bit of context, Ratcliffe's deal was approved and announced by the Premier League today. Now that's approved and announced, Man United can press ahead with going with sporting director. Dan Ashworth's been linked to United for a while, and Dan Ashworth's not communicated to Newcastle publicly or privately. He wants to stay. Omar Barada just went like that and left City out of the blue. There's fears at Newcastle. Dan Ashworth's giving no reassurances. These rumours linking him to United that Dan Ashworth is having talks, having conversations with United and considering leaving. Now, it wasn't just Luke Edwards' article that came out. You also had Alex Crook come out today at the same time. And I think when you've got 3 or 4 sources of information putting out similar stories at the same time, you know that there is definitely some fear within the Newcastle camp they're going to lose Dan Ashworth. And the question has been, will Dan Ashworth leave Newcastle? It was like with Frankie de Jong. We always knew that Manchester United wanted Frankie de Jong, but the question was Frankie de Jong going to leave Barcelona? And if Frankie de Jong was going to leave Barcelona, we were going to get him. And that's been basically the case with Ashworth. Is he going to leave Newcastle? And now the reports are coming out suggesting he is going to leave Newcastle, which is why this is big. It was said by TalkSport that United are ready to step up their interest in Newcastle director Dan Ashworth, and United are confident of hiring Newcastle director Dan Ashworth as their new sporting director. And this was said by Alex Crook, who also went on the MUFC MPB YouTube channel to give a bit of context to this, so do check out that interview. And then it was also said that Sergeant Ratcliffe wants to appoint head of recruitment to work with Ashworth. We've known this from the Muppeteers, we've known this from Romano, we've known this from The Athletic. But interestingly, again, another source of information is coming out saying Newcastle are bracing themselves for Dan Ashworth's departure. We've now got 2 or 3 sources of information saying, oh, Newcastle are getting ready for Dan Ashworth's departure. Newcastle haven't been reassured about Dan Ashworth this, Dan Ashworth that. And if, obviously something could come out tomorrow that would basically say, oh no, Dan Ashworth is staying, and this could be debunked. But the fact that it hasn't been debunked, the fact that Newcastle haven't got any clarity is why they're panicking, because of what happened with, of course, Omar Barada as well. And a lot of people might not remember this, but Brailsford's very, very close with Dan Ashworth. He has a good relationship. And iPaper Sport came out and said that Dave Brailsford's role in pursuing Omar Barada was a massive point in making him leave Man City for United. And potentially maybe he can do the same with Ashworth to attract him to United. But let's continue on. Let's continue into more news, more information that has come out, because we need to get into the context. The deal isn't done. I'm not saying that the deal is going to be done. I'm saying that this is a massive boost. And I don't want anyone to get excited and act like the deal is done. But this is a major boost, because if Dan Ashworth wants to come, it's a big positive for United. And the context of this report, which is really important, that was said by Luke Edwards, is that Dan Ashworth is understood to be irritated by the constant chatter around him leaving for United, but that does not mean he could be tempted to leave given the prestige of the Old Trafford job. It was then said that Dan Ashworth is believed to be in the shortlist of candidates to become Manchester United's new sporting director. However, there has been no approach yet. So the interesting thing is, apparently Man United haven't made an approach, but they're now going to make their approach. because the deal has now been approved by the Premier League, and now the Ineos deal has been approved by the Premier League, they will make their approach, and that's why they hadn't made their approach prior. And I think that's why the Dan Ashworth news, and I said this, once the Premier League approved Ratcliffe's deal, the Dan Ashworth deal is going to be a lot more. It was then said that Manchester United are concerned that Newcastle United are concerned that speculation linking Director of Football Dan Ashworth with a new role at United has unsettled him, and that, Dan Ashworth was probably happy at Newcastle, got them in top four within 18 months of the project, doing a good job. Newcastle, the richest club. I think Newcastle arguably going to be Premier League champions in the next couple of years. They're going to be in the title race. They're going to be the next Man City. There was this feeling that Dan Ashworth was happy at Newcastle. He's hit the jackpot. There's not going to be a bigger club, a bigger deal. But Man United come along, and now he's linked to United. He's thinking, well, this is Manchester United. Yes, you've got security working with the Saudi and Newcastle, but if I can bring Man United back to the top, the biggest club in England by fan base, historically by size, that could be massive for Dan Ashworth. And we're going to talk about Dan Ashworth and what he'll bring to United. Now, this is just a list of some of his recent signings, but you've also got to look at his time at West Brom, some of the signings he made at West Brom when you think of the budget, how he got West Brom back-to-back mid-table finishes. And of course, West Brom had their lowest or second lowest wage bill in the Premier League when they got those back-to-back, was it 10th and 11th place finishes. West Brom's best era was when Dan Ashworth was there. And Dan Ashworth would most definitely be my first choice to come to United. I do apologise if there's a bit of lag there. My Wi-Fi cut out mid-recording, so hopefully we don't get any weird lag spikes coming up. But what he did at West Brom was really, really admirable. He was so important for West Brom. I was speaking to a Wolves fan about it, and he was saying as a rival, when Dan Ashworth was at West Brom and people he knew at West Brom spoke about how brilliant he was. He gave me insight because he knew people from West Brom about how when West Brom needed someone, Dan Ashworth would be on it. He'd get a list of names, transfers, things that they could do within budget. And also he changed the mentality there. It wasn't just recruitment. People will talk about Dan Ashworth's recruitment, but what he's best known for is the mentality change that he's inflicted within the squad. He then went to England. England had their greatest ever teams at the times. They had literally like Scholes, Lampard, Gerrard, Rio, Terry, and England were just rubbish in international tournaments because of an attitude problem. And he found this new England rule book, reset the culture at England, and culture reset is definitely needed at United. He then went to Brighton. He established a style of play and a new Brighton way of positive football, and then they got Graham Potter to do that, and he left Brighton in a position so that when they left Graham Potter, they could bring in De Zerbi to coach this team because of the recruitment he'd done, and obviously names like Caicedo, Mitoma were then sold on for so much more money. He's done brilliant jobs everywhere he's gone. I think Newcastle finishing in the Champions League last season was a massive overachievement. He came to Newcastle when they're 19th. They ended up finishing 12th after a good January window, then 4th. So get in the top four 18 months after their rebuild, even though they've dropped a bit this season, is remarkable. And I think Dan Ashworth is absolutely fantastic. Now, I will say this. Do I think United will get Dan Ashworth? It depends if he's willing to leave Newcastle. The reports indicate that he might be willing to leave Newcastle, but part of me deep down thinks this is going to be hard to do, especially because it's so public. The world knows we want Dan Ashworth. Liverpool are also looking at a sporting director, and at Liverpool, he won't be working under the Glazers. Obviously, the new Ineos regime, they have sporting control, and we've managed to attract Omar Barada to work under the new Ineos regime. But the question mark is, will Dan Ashworth want to work at Man United? He's rejected United in the past because he didn't want to work under Murta, and it has said that Murta is expected to leave his role shortly, and apparently he was reluctant to work under the Glazers. So the question mark now is, does Dan Ashworth want to leave United? There's fears in Newcastle that he wants to leave, that fears that coming out of Newcastle that they think he's going to leave. But again, nothing has been confirmed. All we know is United are desperate for this guy. And it's a bit of a Frankie de Jong situation, but completely different. It's very much the same context. If he wants to leave, we'll get him. If he doesn't want to leave, yeah. Is he going to do a Frankie de Jong and us Dan Ashworth? Does he want to leave Newcastle? Does he not want to leave? Do I want him? Yes, but keep an eye on this. I think it's going to heat up this week. I hope this update was informing. Thank you for watching. Bye.